ultra high definition television, and including a significant amount of time talking about high dynamic range. I know that was of interest to some of you. The second thing is we have some new codecs out there. I'm sure you're familiar with HEVC, high efficiency video coding, but there's also the new open source codec, AV1. And there's a bit of an issue where each of these will be used and when they'll be used. And then there's some exciting new news on adaptive bitrate streaming. The goal, of course, for the last few years is to bring over-the-top streaming, such as the common media application format, or low latency coding for that. That's this morning's session. Phil, as you know what, for a while, and then we'll do the second session, which will cover basically broadcast transition to all IP, as well as software-defined media processing, virtualization topics. Okay. I will try not to go too fast. It is okay to interrupt me anytime. If you prefer to take write down and I get to an end of the spot, I'll ask if there's any questions. But please feel free. If there's something that I said that you don't understand, if you'd like information on, go ahead and ask the question. If I am going to cover that topic, I'll ask you to wait until I get to it. But if not, we can have an interactive conversation. It's really about really getting to know the technology. So it's this is not a sales pitch. If you ask me about our products and stuff that we're doing in this area, I'll be glad to tell you about it. But there's almost nothing in here that's specific to our media processing. Okay. So we're going to start with ultra high definition television. And the first thing to realize, unique at resolving resolution. The best that we can resolve, and it's really only the very center of your eye, with arc minute of resolution, the one arc minute. It depends on who you are. Everybody's different. You know, some people have eye deficiencies, and people can see better than normal. But on average, it's the limit is about a half an arc minute, but most people see easily about one. Important as the resolution of the screens go higher, TV, because most people don't realize this. The rule of thumb, use of 9, you can then translate a complicated formula into some simple rules of thumb. The first one is to resolve, remember that one arc minute of resolution. For you to resolve that for HD, not ultra HD, just for HD, so 1920 by 1080 HD, you need to be about 3. There's 1, there's 2, and 3 goes to about half of the room back that way. It'll still look nice, but you're actually not seeing HD anymore. Your eye cannot resolve that. And so the proper viewing distance for HD, your field degrees, only about 30% of that, 30 degrees, is you're actually looking at the screen. Because you're 60, or 2 times in each direction in the resolution, otherwise, what are you looking at? HD. You're not resolving. So 1.5 picture heights, if this was a 4K TV, back 2/3 of the room, it's a great looking 4K set, you're watching HD. Does that make sense? It's very important as you start offering services, because here's a classic example. This is a pretty large screen. I don't know how big, it's a pretty big screen. Okay, and you just saw the viewing this back from TV, right? So if you take a look at that, you can get, I did this here, and you can also, I'll make a PDF as a presentation versus the diagonal width of the TV. What is to your customers that you're gonna have a sport channel, and people are all excited about that, and they have a 50, and this is about 60, I guess. This is 60, yeah. But you're about 2 meters back where you can start to see. So they get all excited, they go down to the store, and they buy another. If they move that furniture where their feet are going to touch the screen, they're not going to see okay. So it's very important for that. So, and again, you can see the viewing distance on the left. Here's another one here. So I have 2 images on the screen. Which one of these 2 images has a higher resolution? The left side or right? Right? They actually both have the same resolution. The one on the left doesn't have as much dynamic range, it's been softened. So this is a very important point for the human visual system. This is why high dynamic range is so important. The human visual system interprets contrast. Contrast is another way of saying dynamic range. So if you see the sharp edges between the black and the white, because it's higher contrast area, which this is all softened and you know, that's sharper. The human visual system interprets sharpness as resolution. So that looks, the one on the right, which is the same resolution as well, but looks like it has higher resolution. This is why high dynamic range has such an impact. The other thing about high dynamic range, not indeed the contrast. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So let's talk about high dynamic. There's a lot of outside ambient light in this room. So if you areas in the screen, the entire screen would have to be bright, right? Ambient light, like automatic adjust between the dark areas and the bright areas. You need to see as much of the resolution, like the tire tread, you can't see it back there because this is not a high dynamic range display because the difference between the black levels is visible. It's called the specular highlight. That should give you a different feeling of the beam, much brighter. So if this were a high dynamic range display, I don't even know how bright it is, but the measurements of brightness is luminous intensity is candelas per square meter. Now, as an engineer, I get tired of writing candelas per square meter. I get tired of saying square meter. So the unofficial, it's not an SI quantity. The unofficial way is they call it a nit, N-I-T. So the sun is incredibly bright. As you know, if you look at it, it could blind you. So in technical terms, it's a gazillion nits, right? And I don't know how many nits it is, but if you're looking in shadows in a room, probably 5 nits, things like that. But and that's what you want to do now. If you look at what we now call standard dynamic range, it's just a regular television today. We have to give it a name now because we have high dynamic range, so it's called SDR. In a bright sunny day, and the sun is reflecting off of that paint, that light, you squint, right? You can look at it. You don't want to do that unless you plan on wearing a sunglasses. So when you talk about high dynamic range, what you're really referring to are 3 distinct separate image technologies. You're talking about what we were just talking about, the contrast levels, right? The sharpness levels. That is high dynamic range, but it also includes a wider color gamut, like WCG, and your bit resolution is. Of HDR, WCG, and higher bit sampling. The other thing about it is, it doesn't matter what the spatial resolution is. So HDR is equally as applicable 4K and HD because it's spatial resolution, the distance varies depending on that. But with HDR, it does not. Much stronger technology. Had people thought about it, instead of a consumer electronic company coming out with Moore's Law, they can put 4 times the amount of resolution of a piece of glass. They probably should have not focused on 4Q. So in order to understand HDR better and how it works, you have to think in terms of what's known as a color volume. So what we have is the human visual response to color. Inside this space forms a triangle, right? You have an XY coordinate for each one, and the blue is over here, the red is over here, and the green is up here. Again, the human visual system in Steve, which is supposed to be fantastic, right? It's RBT 700 for those standards. 2020, and that's the green line here. Still can't represent all the colors, but you can see it's a lot. If we take that 2-dimensional chromaticity chart and we lay it flat, okay? That's the XY coordinates. And then we use the Z dimension for making a 3-dimensional drawing. The Z dimension to do dynamic range. That's the vertical. Obviously, if we have X, Y, and Z now, instead of being an area, we have a volume. This is what's known as a color volume. So for SDR TV, it's this inner block right there. For the standards for HDR TV, it's the outer block. I hope you can see it's a much bigger volume. So you have better dynamic range and you have better color response, so the pictures look more real, right? Something else interesting about this chart at all here? Any notice anything? Vertical? Yep. But what about that vertical line? Look what it's measured in terms of. It's a log scale. X and Y are linear, but Z is log. Z equals 1, 10, 100, 1,000, equally spaced. So if I made that linear, the Z dimension would be way up, 10 stories high, maybe? That's how much of an impact that high dynamic range has. Very hard to represent with pictures like this, standard display. Has anybody here seen high dynamic range, a good demo of high dynamic range? It really looks fantastic when it's done right. It reminds me going back 20 years ago when, actually 25 years ago, when HD was first coming out. There were all these demos of high definition television. They didn't look so good because they weren't set up right. You have to have the demo set up right, and with a good HDR monitor, it really looks so much more real. You can definitely tell the difference. Visually trying to show you this color volume. So why are we talking about color volume? So most likely LCD liquid crystal display with probably an LED light emitting diode background to light it up, because I hope most of you know that the way an LCD display is, the LCD has a charge in it, and we want to block it's transmissive. In other words, the light is behind it. If you want it to be dark in the screen, you do the power setting on the LCD, and it blacks out the light. So it blocks it out. So the light's behind it. Then you have OLEDs, organic LEDs. They're actually transmissive. The light comes through, and when you want it to be black, what do? You turn it off. So what does that tell you? A low LED set can get much deeper blacks because it really is black. It's off, as opposed to an LCD display where you're blocking the light. And this is also the reason why they're using LEDs now instead of fluorescent lights behind an LCD panel, because there used to be one set of lights and you're blocking it. Now they have regional backgrounds where they can actually shut the LEDs off in the background to emulate better brightness. So every display has a different way of displaying high dynamic range, but there's one standard. So you have to map the color volume of what the signal is to the capabilities of the display. That's no different than saying if you're mapping the color response of a television. So it's both in what's known as tone mapping, which is the intensity, the brightness of usual colors, VR, but also gamut mapping as well, which is the color. In some cases, the brighter you make it, you can get a color shift. The gamut mapping changes. You have to be careful. It's a 3D mapping function, so. You probably will hear a lot if you study HDR. You'll hear about transfer functions. Don't let the word transfer function set you back. It just means you're converting from one space into another. So in the case of television itself is a transfer function. What are you doing with the television system? Not a TV itself, the television system. You're starting where we are here, and you capture that scene light with a camera, right? So what are you doing? You're converting light or optics into an electronic signal. So what does a camera do? A camera has a transfer function. It's opto-electronic transfer function. Light, electronic. That's OETF. You'll see that described for camera. Same thing with displays. What does a display do? It takes that electronic bit stream and converts it what? Back to light. Now, it's not scene light. We talked about this before, right? Because if it was scene light and we were doing a bright day, you'd blow your eyes out in the house and you'd have to wear sunglasses. But more importantly, think of the power it would require in order to run that. And consumer displays not only are not capable of doing that, you wouldn't like your electric bill either. display light. So that's converting from an electronic signal, electro, to optics, electro-optical transfer function, EOTF. What we're showing here is the function of a reference display on the bottom here to a target display. If they are the same, this is in terms of nits. So in HDR, the brightest of the scale is 10,000 nits, and the darkest of the scale is below 10 to the minus 3 nits. And if the response was equal, you'd have this dashed line. TVs don't do that. So they have a toe and a knee. Actually, it shouldn't be toe, it should be ankle, right? Ankle's the opposite of knee. They have an ankle here and a knee there. So when you're converting from one to the other, that's in the bit stream. It's bit stream to bit stream conversion, so it's what? The electronic transfer function, or EETF. The reason I explain this is the names sound very complicated, you get lost in it. It's really pretty simple. It's just transferring from one number space to another. So this is the different responses depending on which TV it is. So what does that translate to? That translates to a color volume mapping. And what happens is there are more than 6 different HDR systems defined out there. So in other words, it's the antithesis of a standard. Because if you have 6 ways of doing something, how is that called a standard, right? The whole point of having a standard is you do it one way, everybody does it the same way, and you have interoperability. And economies of scale because you define the interface. So we now have 6 more different, it really is a mess out there. Nobody wanted to cooperate this time. It's all about the intellectual property, right? But I'm still gonna walk you through it. So there are 2 types of HDR systems defined out there, static and dynamic. The first ones are static. Static basically means that for a scene, okay, and a scene could be anywhere from 1 frame to 5 minutes worth of frames. It could be thousands of frames, right? It's the color volume mapping stays the same. So the most basic of these, there are 2 of them that are the most basic, PQ10 and HLG10. And PQ10, remember I told you that that HDR is really the combination of 3 technologies. Remember, it was HDR plus WCG, wide color gamut, and the sampling bit depth, right? So PQ10 is the SMPTE standard 2084 perceptual quantization. That's what PQ stands for. Transfer function. It really isn't an EOTF curve. Remember the electro-optical transfer function. It's actually defined in the standard, combined with the wide color gamut, that's that XY chromaticity chart I showed you, defined in BT 2020, and 10 bits of sample depth. What I haven't shown you here, because I only have 90 minutes, is what it looks like when you only have 8 bits. Almost all consumer content today is 8 bits, unless you're doing this, especially for this. So 8 bits. 8 bits is 2 to the 8 because it's a computer, right? 2 to the 8 is how many levels? 256? Let's just make it 250. It's actually 225 because there's some reserve values. But for us here, we're just going to call it 250. That means you can only represent your brightness and your color with 250 different levels. That's fine normally, except what happens if I'm looking at a beautiful sunset? Nothing's moving in the scene, it's static. If you go across that, you're going to see the brightness just go from the sun being bright to being dark, and that's like walking up a ramp or going down a ramp, right? It's a continuous change of values, but you only have 250 values. So that's like stair steps, right? Same values, you get to a step, and then you go up a value or down a value, right? At those points, you see contouring lines. Most people say, oh, that's posterization, it's from using compression. No, from not having enough sampling depth. That's why 10 bits is so important. At least they have viewed it. 2 to the 10 is 1,024 is about 1,000 steps. The reason why that's a magic number is, even though there's still steps, the natural noise is hidden by dithering that your eye sees. So the noise actually hides the step level. So that's what PQ10 is. It's the PQ transfer function, the EOTF, the light color gamut, the chromaticity chart defined in the 10-bit sample. There's an alternative transfer function that works very differently. This is known as display oriented and or display referred. This is known as scene referred. This is an absolute value. HLG stands for hybrid log gamma. So it's a hybrid of the gamma function that you have in SDR TVs. Of course, every TV has, you have to map the light. Everybody has a transfer function. Has everybody here heard of gamma? Have you done gamma when you've done display? Right. That's what they're referring to. It's luminosity L, which is the brightness, equals the voltage level or the bit stream level to the power of gamma. That's where it comes from. So that's the standard SDR function. In HDR, they define it in terms of a hybrid log, just the gain level that you can. I have more time, but I don't. But I just want to say there's two different types. This is HLG10, which has the same wide color gamut and the same 10-bit sampling depth as PQ10, but it uses a scene referred transfer function for that. So in this case, it is an OETF, the opposite. If I take PQ10, and because it's an absolute value, you want to know what the conditions were where it was recorded. This is a relative value. This one here, I need something to calculate information. That's known as metadata. So HDR10 is the PQ10 plus reference display metadata, which is another SMPTE standard. Is everybody here familiar with SMPTE? The Society of Motion Pictures and Television Engineers. It's an international standard. So this is actually how Blu-ray defines their Blu-ray Disc Association that first came out in the Consumer Technology Association. The simple way of doing static HDR. So these are the three most common static HDR systems out there. Which one's the best use? It really depends on the application. This is more commonly found if you're doing either a motion picture or an episodic television, episodic production, where it's offline, so you have a colorist involved and they do a great job. This is more common in live production, because when it's live, you can actually just tweak the knob and have it come out from that. So it's a little bit easier to do. The other set is known as dynamic HDR. What that is, remember before the whole scene stayed the same? The dynamic metadata system, it actually can change, dynamic HDR system, it can actually change every video frame. So you have to carry that information of what's changed in metadata. So it's metadata that gets collected. And this is another SMPTE standard, it's called SMPTE ST2094. So it's content-dependent metadata. And it's really important for these areas that it defines where the deep shadow is, the minimum level, mid-tones, which is faces and interior shots, and the highlights. Those are those things like reflection of light off the car, like sunlight, or maybe off of water. You've been to the beach, and the sunlight's out, you look at the water, you kind of squint sometimes because the sun's so bright reflecting. So, in this particular area, again, because everybody wants more systems that have to define, because why have just one when you can have many? The three most popular ones out there, not in any particular order, but I think Dolby Vision is the most common. Dolby Vision, something known as Samsung HDR10 Plus, you might have heard of that. I think Amazon uses that. And then Philips Technicolor, they're going to have something called SL-HDR1, which stands for Single Layer High Dynamic Range Type 1. These two are defined in the SMPTE standard. This is defined in another standard body. That's it. In this particular case, remember I told you to carry the metadata in it. This type of metadata is descriptive. It says what you have. It doesn't tell you what to do. It just says, here's your low levels, here's your mid-tone, here's your high level. And the device itself will decide what to do with it. How many people here have worked with active format description, ASD? Have you worked with that? That's the widescreen information. As you know, AFD is the same way. It's a metadata. It's descriptive. It doesn't tell the display what to do. It just says, I have, for instance, a 16 by 9 image with a 4 by 3 protect, or something like that. And the display decides whether it's going to center cut it or whether it's going to letterbox it, right? The display decides, on the end user decides. It's the same thing. This says, these are my low, mid, and high levels. You decide what you want to do with it. I'm just telling you what it is. In this particular mechanism, it's different. It's prescriptive. If you don't use this metadata, you will not get HDR. It's the opposite. What they do in this system is they start with an HDR signal. They do their own transfer function, which is proprietary to them. Proprietary. Yeah, it's defined in a standards document, but it's not a standard, if that makes sense. It's their mechanism. And then they set it as SDR under the guise of it being backwards compatible. And then if you have an HDR set, you do the reverse. Using the prescriptive metadata, you can recover the HDR. So you have a beautiful HDR signal, probably 4K. They're going to convert it to a backwards compatible SDR, HD, or even SD signal in the narrow color volume, so it's a white color gamut, narrow color gamut. And then you're going to recover the other way. So it's kind of carrying a legacy signal around with it. The problem is it's really not truly backwards compatible. We'll tell you it is. And if we had a half an hour, I'd explain to you why it's not truly backwards compatible. Just keep this in mind. If you come across this, SLHDR1 works very different than the other. So how do we signal in the stream what type of HDR we have and where the metadata character is? So here's the pictures. Here's the camera on the left. We capture that in the field, so contribution, like a backhaul. Then we have primary distribution to go to a final distribution point. Then you have the emissions, which is when you're broadcasting it, whether it's emissions, by digital terrestrial television or whether it's emissions over the internet. And you get the other day. So there are 3 different ways you can carry this for interfaces. I think everybody here has heard of SDI, right? So if it's SDI, or if it happens to be SDI in IP, are you guys familiar with SMPTE standard 2022-6? So whether it's SDI, IP, SDI IP, the signaling is carried in the payload ID, and that's defined in SMPTE standard 352. And then every HDI standard, I know this is even hard to believe. Do you know there's 3 dozen? Seriously, there's almost 36 different SDI standards. Because the way SMPTE defined them, it's the copper or the glass in the definition all the way up to the application layer. They define the whole thing. It's an industry. It's not proprietary because SMPTE is a standards body, but it's an industry specific. Only video people use SDI, right? And everyone is defined differently. Keep that in mind when I do the later section and talk about broadcast migration to all IP. This is one of the reasons why we're migrating, is now we only need 1 standard instead of 36 to describe all the video formats for the IP. Just keep that in mind for foreshadowing. That's the signal. That just says I either have SDR or which HDR system I have, which color gamut you have, maybe with the bit depth and everything. It's signaling. Signaling is saying how you grab the stream and do something with it. Metadata, as we described before, is except for SLHDR1, is descriptive. It's information you use about the data. You decide what you want to do with that. That's carried depending on the system in the bit stream. It's a brand new SMPTE standard. It's 20108, and that is actually packs it in the case of SDI or SDI IP in the vertical ancillary data, the V-answer bank. I don't know which way you guys call it, V-answer bank. It's carried in that. Just like you pack in your captioning, your active format description, the time codes, and those set of values are defined. We're defined. If you're doing production that uses KLV, key length value, production is the second part of that same thing. How many people here are familiar with the new standard, Pro Media over IP, SMPTE Standard 2110? All right, we're going to cover that in detail in that session. You have to go ahead, but suffice to say that there's a different way of carrying it in which is known as 2110-40. If we're for all IP systems, we're going to go through that in gory detail in the next section. This is on the production side. On the consumer side, I know you guys have heard of HDMI, right? I'm using HDMI right here to go to this display. Everybody here knows what HDMI is. There's a version of HDMI, it must be a minimum of 2.0B, 2.0B, in order to carry the signaling and the metadata through to an end device. Earlier versions of HDMI do not support it. Okay. If it's a 1.x, if it's 1.3, 1.4, you can't, it doesn't work at all. If it's a 2.0, it's a software blast or a firmware blast. And then in the compressed bit stream, the only thing that can carry 4K is HEVC, high efficiency video. It has something known as the main 10 profile, but ABC, MPEG-4 ABC also has it. They have something called video usability information. If you know what this is, great. I'm going to explain to you. If you don't know what it is, don't worry about it. It's just a bit stream that happens compressed. Signaling is done in VUI messages, metadata is carried in SVP. Unfortunately, because we have 3 different major types, actually it's now 4 different major types of dynamic metadata system, and of course, none of them do it the same way. Of course not, right? When it's time to implement HDR, you will appreciate it if I'm saying okay. The thing to keep in mind when you're mixing SDR into HDR flows is you have to match the color volume. Does that make sense? That's why I walked into the color volume. Because if you try to display SDR on an HDR display or vice versa, it will not look right. One will look very dark and you won't be able to see anything because you're mapping the nit values differently. And the other one will be so bright it will be all washed out. So you have to match color volume. Now, just like, this is no different than just like, we go back 20, 25 years, when we first started doing HD TV. We've had a new HD channel, and the material was SD. When we first started broadcasting that, you sent it out on the HD channel as SD to the displays, and the displays had to switch modes between SD and HD. Do you remember what happened? That was a long time ago. Some of you guys probably weren't even engineers yet, right? Anyways, no. It would either freeze the TV or would do something weird or would take it a minute to resolve. We don't want that. We want the same constant format. The same thing will happen if you try to mix SDR into an HDR. It'll either look wrong or it will freeze. You want to make consistency. So we want to make SDR look like it's HDR or vice versa. That's the color volume mapping we're talking about. You can't, just like you can't create 4K from HD or HD from SD. You can't create it, but you can map it into the right format so that it will display correctly, right? Sort of like thinking in this particular case, if you have a nice big color volume of HDR, right? And you have an SDR color volume, if you just stick it in the HDR, it's going to be way down, actually it's going to be way up here in there because of the brightness. They'll be all washed out. But if you know you're doing that, you can move it to that smaller color volume to the right place within the larger color volume to display correctly, right? It won't be HDR, it'll be SDR, it'll be displayed at the right coordinates in the HDR space. I hope that makes sense. So we can do the same thing here. We can't create it, but we can try to match the hue and balance the saturation and the brightness values. And that is known when you go from SDR to HDR to do that. It is known as inverse tone mapping because you're going from a smaller volume to a larger one. If you do it in real time and you do it smartly, it's known as real-time intelligent inverse tone mapping. So here's why. Now remember, I'm emulating everything here, so you just have to believe me what I'm saying. So here's a common level. We have football happening. It's the main program. So think of this as the main program that's happening segment. This is a series of, could be 20 minutes. And then we go to a commercial break. Okay. We have an SDR commercial, followed by a second SDR commercial, then we're back to the main program. Now, this is a standard dynamic rates display. Let's just assume it's HDR. And then we have an SDR one. We don't, this looks, probably looks okay, you guys back there. I'll show you what it's supposed to look like. You see the difference? This wasn't matte. So it didn't look right. It's either gonna be really flushed out or really dark. This was mapped into the right place. It's still SDR, it's not HDR, but it's put in the right place. Why is this so important? Because I happen to be using Coca-Cola here. I don't own any stock in Coca-Cola. I was just lazy, went to the internet and grabbed a photo. Okay, but it's important because Coca-Cola has a branding. They have Coca-Cola Red. It really is called Coca-Cola Red. And they're paying a lot of money to do advertising. So if you don't reproduce their Coca-Cola Red correctly, they're gonna want you to do a make for it, right? That's why this is so important to tone that. Never mind the fact that you want to be able to see skin tones and everything else, right? So I talked to you before about the fact that if engineers were the ones prevailing in the next generation immersive television, it wouldn't have been 4K, it would have been high dynamic range. And I talked to you about the viewing distance issues of high dynamic range, about 4K versus high dynamic range, and the benefit of that. So what about 1080p HDR? Think about that. You get all the benefits of HDR, but you don't need the extra bandwidth to do 4K. 4K is in the uncompressed domain. It really is 4 times the bandwidth. So if you're doing full HD now in the SDI plant, it's 3 gigabits per second. If you're going to do 4K, it's 12 gigabits per second. Now you can do that running 4 3 gigabit per second links, right? But if you're going to be doing production, that's a lot of expense for you. You have more storage costs on the server. More importantly is if you're broadcasting this, right, over the airways, that's a lot of bandwidth. Even in compressed domain, it's 250% more, or 2.5 times HD. So why not just broadcast it as 1080p? All the modern 4K sets, everything that's been done with 4K, they all have great upconverters in them, as long as it's progressive and not interlaced. We're going to leave the discussion of interlaced video out of this. We're not talking 1080i here. 1080p. Okay. Again, that's a 2-hour discussion just talking about interlace and de-interlace. If you did this, why not just do this and get all the advantages of that? Now, this is key. It's just the broadcast format. The TV's going to upload. There's no such thing as a 1080p HDR set. The consumer electronic companies, they're way past that. They're making 8K TVs now. Okay. An 8K TV, how far back do you have to sit from an 8K TV to see 8K? Half of the distance again. So instead of it being 1.5 H, it is 0.75. Okay. This was an 8K TV and you wanted to resolve it. It's 3/4 of a picture height back. You gotta be here. You really do have your feet on the screen. Can you imagine that? I don't know. My wife would never put up with that being the seats for the TV being that close. There's obviously another application for home viewing. Okay, but if you do 1080p, you save the bandwidth you do and make a lot quicker. A lot of broadcasters are looking at 1080p. I call it the best bang for the bit because you're using much less bandwidth. Now, of course, when you do this, if you're going to do HDR, the TV still has to be an HDR TV. Right? I hope you all understand that. Right? So if you have a 4K HDR TV, you can broadcast 1080p HDR to it, and it will upconvert it, and you won't see that much of a difference. Why? Because most people sit 3 horizontal heights back, 2 meters, 2.5 meters from your TV. You're not going to see it. Of course, not all you guys are going to go out. Move your table places close. Any questions about any of this stuff? Before we go to the next topic. Good? Was it interesting? Was it the right level? I try to start at high level, go down a little bit without getting too deep because I don't want to blow anybody away. Okay. So that was interesting, good? That'll set the tone for the rest of the talk. So I'm just going to go right. If there's no questions on this, I'm going to go right to the next topic. Okay? So this is either awesome What a great job, Matthew. Yeah.
And you said that for HDR, you need at least 2.0 HDMI.
Yes. 2.0B. 2.0, like, the good news is 2.0 is the major standard. The A and the B are things that can be looked at as a firmware blast. So if you own one of the smart TVs that has that in it, if you connect it to the internet, you can actually download the firmware over the internet and it'll blast it. I think it's pretty much, I think every manufacturer will do that. I'm trying to think if there's anybody that's not doing that. I think they're all doing that. But it has to be 2.0. The reason being is the 1.0 can't handle the bandwidth.
Yeah, you said that it's the fact that there are 6 HDR standards.
Yeah.
Is there a trend or different brands which is adopting one?
Great question. Great question. Yes, we're starting to see a trend now. It's still early. The trend is happening more out of frustration. But the easiest to implement as far as on the production side is either PQ10 or HDR10 on the production side. The reason why HDR10 is just PQ10 with the metadata, so it's not that much on it. And it's descriptive metadata, so you don't really need to have it in order to do it. You can guess what it is. If you're doing live production, the trend is to do HLG10 because it's just easier to do live production. So there's no resolution between HLG 10 and PQ10 because of that. They're both are static. Static is easier. In the dynamic world right now, there was just an announcement. Every major TV manufacturer except for Samsung, which you can guess why, because they have HDR10 plus. Every other one, I might not be exactly right, there might be another brand, but they're all doing Dolby Vision.
Consumer TVs,
Yeah.
they are adopting.
Yeah.
the
Most of them
same
do.
way, or they try to install all these standards.
Well, not every TV does all of them. I mean, obviously, Samsung's does HDR10 plus. Now, if you know anything about the competition in the TV industry, you can probably guess who's the other major Korean television company. LG. You think LG implemented Samsung's HDR10 plus? No, not in your life. No way they will. And those two are, it's like cats and dogs fighting. So the issue with Dolby Vision is that there is a royalty with it, which some people balk at paying. On the broadcasting side, it's not. It's pennies. On the TV side, it does cost a little bit per TV. So, any other questions?
You mentioned that the portal is the distance.
Yes, very important. Nobody talks about it. You go to the electronics. What's in the U.S. a big electronics store is Best Buy. What do you have here? Is there a big electronics store? Anything? Are they all family stores in? Family stores. Okay. So, but you still must have one where one of them specializes in like home theater, right? When you go into the store, they'll have like a 5.1 setup for sound. They have these new sound bars that are awesome. You've seen those where it emulates, it takes your ear up, you think you have sound in the whole room. It's a sound bar. But they do all this time in setting up proper speaker placement, making sure you understand that, how to hook it up so that you have 5.1 sound. No one tells you about the viewing business. I want to make sure you do it for two reasons. One, because engineers, right, we like to know this stuff, so now you can be smart about it and tell you that. But the second thing is, for those of you that are broadcasting content providers, you know, your marketing department isn't going to know this. So they're going to say, look at how great this is. Yeah, but don't go out and offer 40-inch displays as a gift for someone that's big. They're going to sit right here and see it. So that's why it's important to know. It just says it does impact. HDR, phenomenal. Be in the back of it. One caveat with HDR.
No,
Go ahead.
I think apart from I need to see my TV sitting in my bathroom.
Yep.
Because I need not this way. No,
How many people here have TVs in their bathroom? Come on. That's my wife's room. She wants to sit in the tub and have the TV mounted up. So
Ellos porque tienen teléfono, están en el baño.
When you're in the bath, take your bath. I'm not saying you're doing anything else.
Inodoro inteligente.
Todo querido.
Yes. Oh, a tablet. So, here's a tablet. Okay, so I think full-size tablet, right? Okay, same thing.